Le Mans, 1966. Ford versus Ferrari. For the world, it was a triumph of American power. But beneath the roar of the engines lay not just a race, but a drama where personal vendetta and victory intertwined with betrayal. This was a story of how one personal insult escalated into a war of titans, of how American industrial might challenged European racing aristocracy, and of the true cost of that victory, where one man's genius was caught between corporate ambition and bureaucratic rules. But what truly defines victory? Absolute superiority on the track, or the inevitable compromises and sacrifices that remain in the shadow of resounding success? And can true triumph ever be complete when its taste remains bitter for some? A storm was brewing at the heart of the automotive world, one that would change the course of motorsport history forever. On one side of this storm cloud stood Henry Ford II, grandson of the legendary founder, head of an immense empire, eager to make his mark not only on the assembly line, but also on the world's racetracks. On the other, Commendatore Enzo Ferrari, an undisputed authority whose name had become synonymous with speed, passion, and exclusivity. Henry Ford II yearned to expand Ford's racing program, to give it European flair, an Italian soul. His gaze fell upon Ferrari. What could be more logical? To merge American power with Italian temperament. The deal began to be prepared with the characteristic grandeur of transatlantic corporations. Negotiations dragged on, but seemed successful. Millions of dollars were ready to change hands, contract drafts almost finalized. Two titanic figures, embodying vastly different automotive philosophies, were ready to shake hands. But at the last moment, everything collapsed. It wasn't money, nor legal technicalities, that became the stumbling block. The stumbling block was Enzo Ferrari himself, a man who might sell his company, but would never sell his racing soul. He flatly refused to concede control over his sacred racing division. Ferrari cars were merely a means for him to fund his true passion, racing. To surrender that part of himself, his brainchild, his spirit, was unthinkable. The Commendatore abruptly terminated negotiations, severing not only the deal, but also the delicate thread of respect between the two magnates. But this was only the beginning. In the corridors, like wildfire, a rumor spread. Enzo Ferrari hadn't just refused. He had personally insulted Henry Ford II, calling him, no less, a fat, ignorant American, unworthy of owning his legacy. Whether these words were actually uttered, or if it was merely a legend born of bitter disappointment, it no longer matters today. What matters is that Henry Ford II believed it. His face flushed with rage, his pride shattered. This wasn't just a business failure. It was a personal humiliation, a public slap in the face to the American giant from a defiant Italian. At that moment, in the depths of a luxurious office, steeped in the scent of expensive wood and shattered hopes, not just a decision was born. A vow was forged, hammered out of fury and wounded pride. Henry Ford II turned to his engineers and top executives, his voice hard as steel. "We will crush them. We will flatten them on the track. We will build a car that will leave no stone unturned of Ferrari on their own turf, at the 24 hours of Le Mans." It was a challenge thrown in the face of the entire motorsport world, a declaration of war that would forever change endurance racing. Ford was ready to pay any price for revenge, and the name of this revenge was victory. The vow had been made. Henry Ford II's fury demanded an immediate answer, an answer that had to resound on motorsport's most sacred ground, and that answer was embodied in metal and glass. In 1964, just a year after Enzo Ferrari's fateful refusal, the world saw the first fruit of American pride and resentment, the Ford GT40. The name was telling: GT, Grand Touring, and the number 40, its height in inches, from the ground to the roof. 40 inches, just over a meter. It was a purebred racing machine, low-slung, wide, aggressive. Every line, every curve of its fiberglass body was dictated by a single goal: to conquer the 24 hours of Le Mans. Created in haste, but with immense ambition, this car was to be Ford's instrument of revenge. But the first round did not go to the Americans. The 1964 debut at the legendary French track was not a triumph, but a real disaster. The GT40 was magnificent on paper, but in practice, it fell apart. Engines, borrowed from production cars, couldn't withstand the hellish demands of the marathon. The suspension failed. The aerodynamics, created in a desperate race against time, proved deceptive. At the ultra-high speeds of Le Mans' long straights, the car became nervous, unstable, dangerous. Drivers complained. Le Mans was an endurance test, not a single-lap speed trial, and the early GT40 versions were completely unprepared for this endurance, for this relentless regimen. One after another, Ford's hopes shattered against the harsh reality of the racetrack. And while Ford struggled, trying to make their cars go, and then actually finish, Ferrari merely smirked. Their red machines continued to circle the track, like predators enjoying the helplessness of their prey. From 1960 to 1965, year after year, without interruption, Ferrari achieved 6 triumphant victories in a row at Le Mans. 6 times their scarlet cars crossed the finish line first. 6 times Enzo Ferrari celebrated victory on French soil, which seemed to have become his domain. Each new victory only amplified Ford's humiliation, multiplying the doubts and pressure on Henry Ford II and his team. It became clear: this challenge, this revenge, would require much more than just a new car, hastily built. Something entirely different would be needed: a new heart, and a completely new strategy. Time was running out, and Ferrari continued to dominate. The pressure on Ford reached a critical point. Drastic changes were needed, and they were not long in coming. The pressure on Ford had reached a boiling point. The year 1964 was drawing to a close, and dreams of victory at Le Mans were turning into a nightmare of breakdowns and humiliations. Not just a change, but a complete overhaul was urgently needed. And Lee Iacocca, the man behind many of Ford's bold decisions, knew exactly who to turn to. His name was legendary: Carroll Shelby, a former racer whose health issues prevented him from getting behind the wheel himself, but did not diminish his talent for seeing victory where others saw only difficulties. A man who had already transformed an unassuming British roadster into a fierce Cobra, combining a lightweight chassis with the raw power of American V8s. It was to this Texan cowboy, with his inimitable grin and fearless gaze, that Iacocca handed the keys to the entire GT40 racing project. Shelby didn't bother with half measures. He looked at the elegant but fragile European chassis, at those 40 inches from the ground to the roof, which so desperately tried to shed weight, and made a decision that many at Ford gasped at. To hell with small, high-revving engines that fell apart at Le Mans. To hell with engineers who whispered about balance, aerodynamics, and fuel economy. Shelby wanted raw, unrefined power. He demanded a 7-liter engine, that monstrous Ford 427 cubic inch engine. It was a heavyweight engine, built more for drag racing or NASCAR than for a sophisticated European marathon. How could this monster be squeezed into the cramped, low GT40 chassis? Ford engineers, brought up on more refined principles, were horrified. Weight, fuel consumption, handling on winding sections. All these questions hung in the air like a cloud of skepticism. But Shelby was adamant. He knew that Le Mans wasn't just about corners. It also had miles of straights where pure, unadulterated speed dominated. And for that speed, he needed the biggest, most powerful engine Ford could offer. He was convinced Le Mans was a war of attrition, and in this war, the one with the most powerful force pulsating in the beast's heart would win. And it was here that the true magic of engineering came into play, transforming a merely powerful engine into a legend. This 427 wasn't just big, it was a side oiler. The name was no coincidence. Unlike conventional engines where oil first went through the camshaft and then to the crankshaft, the lubrication system here was designed differently. Oil was directed directly to the most critical elements, the main crankshaft bearings, from where it was then distributed further. This seemed like a minor detail, but in practice, it meant a colossal difference. Under the hellish loads of Le Mans, when the engine was pounding at near maximum RPM for weeks, standard lubrication might not cope. Bearings would overheat, the oil film would break, metal would rub against metal. The side oiler, however, provided unprecedented reliability, constantly bathing the crankshaft in oil, preserving its integrity even under the most brutal operating conditions. It was designed to withstand torture. It was that new heart that not only breathed power, but also promised the endurance to survive the entire hell of Le Mans. Thus, under Shelby's leadership and with Iacocca's support, the rebirth of the GT40 began. The old Mark I, with its delicate engines, was relegated to the past. The GT40 Mark II was emerging, muscular, fierce, built around its colossal 7-liter heart. This was no longer just an answer. It was a threat that was meant to make Ferrari's red cars tremble with fear. Ford was ready for war, and this time it had a weapon worthy of its fury. Blood ran cold. Ford was angry. But to understand the full depth of this rage, one must go back a few years. In 1963, Henry Ford II, heir to the empire, made an attempt that was supposed to turn the world of motorsport upside down. He wanted to buy Ferrari. Imagine, an American giant swallowing an Italian legend. The deal was almost complete, but at the last moment, Enzo Ferrari, proud and unyielding, refused to sell control over his racing heart. It is said that during those dramatic negotiations, the Italian did not mince words, calling Henry Ford II a fat, ignorant American. The insult was deadly. This was no longer just business. It was a personal vendetta. And Henry Ford II swore, if he couldn't buy Ferrari, he would destroy it on the track. And now, after the unsuccessful debuts of the GT40 Mark I, with its fragile European engines, and with Ferrari dominating Le Mans for 6 consecutive years, the pressure was unbearable. Under Shelby's leadership, when the muscular 427 side oiler found its place in the Mark II, it seemed that the right weapon had finally appeared. But transforming a drag racing monster, designed for a quarter-mile or NASCAR ovals, into an endurance fighter for the 24-hour hell of Le Mans proved much more difficult. A treacherous truth emerged during testing. The engine, so reliable under peak loads, began to falter during prolonged operation at the extreme RPMs required for the endless straights of Sartha. Racing engineers, accustomed to precision, were faced with the fact that this beast required a special, almost shamanic approach. Record RPMs for many hours. This was a challenge even for this engineering marvel. Components that seemed indestructible began to melt under such pressure. And then, whispers started circulating within the team. Rumors that in the frantic race against time to make it to the coveted 1966 Le Mans, the team might have cut corners in the testing program. Could it be that in a desperate attempt to save time, they relied solely on the colossal, almost excessive safety margin of the side oiler itself? Could Henry Ford II's determination, his personal vendetta, be pushing them to take risks? These questions hung in the air, adding to the tension. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back. Ford was not going to lose. Never again. They had invested not just millions in this race. They had invested honor. And to leave no doubt about their determination, they brought an entire army to Sarth. Not one, not two, not even 5, 8. 8 dazzling GT40 Mark IIs, each with that roaring 7-liter heart, lined up on the starting grid of the 1966 Le Mans. It was the largest factory entry in the history of the race. This was not just a challenge to Ferrari. It was a declaration of war. And Ford had come not just to participate. It had come to win. Whatever the cost. Midnight descended on Sartha, but the electricity in the air was palpable more than ever. 8 predatory silhouettes, each concealing the heart of an enraged bull, awaited their moment. The roar of the starting gun shattered the silence, and the armada of American steel surged forward like lions unleashed from a cage. This was not just the start of a race. This was the beginning of a hunt. From the very first laps, it became clear. Ferrari, once invincible, was on this day but a shadow of its former glory. This engineering masterpiece, the GT40 Mark II, with its indomitable power from the 427 side oiler, didn't just stay in the leading group, it led it. The crews of Ken Miles and Denny Hume in car number 1, as well as Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon in car number 2, set a pace that the others simply could not match. For 24 hours straight, under the scorching sun and in the treacherous darkness of night, the American beasts devoured kilometers. Every overtake, every pit stop, every moment was filled with anticipation. When would something go wrong? For there had been so many doubts, so many rumors of hasty modifications to these monsters. Yet they held. Not just held, they dominated, leaving a trail of broken hopes for their competitors. Hours turned into an eternity. The eternal battle of man and machine pushed to the limits, multiplied by the fury of irreconcilable rivalry. Ferrari, though it tried to bite back, had no chance. Sartha had not seen such total superiority in a long time. By dawn, as fatigue distorted the faces of mechanics and drivers, only 3 familiar silhouettes gleamed on the scoreboard. Ford, 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 and the gap to the nearest pursuers grew, turning into an abyss. The tension in the Ford pits was thicker than oil in an engine sump. Victory was almost in the bag. But simply winning wasn't enough for Henry Ford II. He wanted a triumph that would forever be etched in history, a moment that would symbolize his retribution. And then came the order that entered legend, the order for a dead heat. His goal, for cars number 1 and 2, running in first and second place, to cross the finish line simultaneously. The perfect shot. The perfect demonstration of team power, crushing Italian pride. A symbol of unity and undeniable superiority. But in this thirst for the ideal PR stunt lay a cruel irony. Ken Miles, the legendary British driver, who had long become the face of this battle, was at the wheel of the leading GT40. He was the driving force of the program, the man who had perfected this fierce Mark II. Victory at Le Mans was his. But this order, it was like a knife in the back. It is said that this decision was not just a pursuit of symbolism. Some whispered that Ford management, tired of Miles's difficult personality and independence, deliberately deprived him of a personal victory. Miles, forced to obey, slowed down, allowing McLaren and Amon to catch up. 3 cars, 3 titans, slowly, almost ceremoniously, lined up, preparing for the historic moment. The crowd roared, cameras clicked, the world held its breath in anticipation of an unprecedented finish. But fate had its own rules. According to Le Mans regulations, in the event of a simultaneous finish, the winner was declared the crew that had covered the greater distance, taking into account their starting position. And McLaren and Eamon had started slightly further back on the grid. And there it was, the dramatic finale. Although all three Fords crossed the line almost synchronously, car number 2 was declared the winner. Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon. Victory belonged to Ford, but not as Miles had wanted it. Reportedly, as he crossed the finish line, Ken Miles gestured his contempt towards the Ford pits, a bitter pill after 24 hours of hell and dominance. Le Mans 1966 went down in history not only as a grand victory of the American giant over the Italian aristocrat, but also as a story of sacrifices, ambitions, and not always fair play. Ford got what it wanted. They didn't just win the race. They swept the podium, taking first, second, and third places, forever breaking Ferrari's dominance. It wasn't just a triumph of engineering and speed. It was the ultimate retribution, embodied in metal, fire, and the roar of the 427 side oiler. The images that flashed across the world captured them. 3 American cars crossing the finish line in unison. A perfect symphony of steel and roar. A scene worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. But the echo of this triumphant finish was quickly replaced by a murmur of bewilderment. Triumph? Absolutely. But for whom exactly? After all, Le Mans is a race where there are no ties. The rules of Le Mans, deeply rooted in its long history, were unambiguous. In the event of an absolutely simultaneous finish, the winner was declared the crew which, taking into account the difference in starting positions, had covered a greater actual distance. Car number 2, driven by Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon, started slightly further on the grid than Ken Miles's leading GT40. This seemingly minor detail, which no one would have noticed in the heat of a normal battle, proved fatal. It fractured Ford's victory into millions of shards, each reflecting bitterness rather than jubilation. And it is here, in the shadow of this engineering triumph, that the true drama unfolded. What looked like a strategic PR move is still considered by many to be a carefully planned vendetta. Not only against Enzo Ferrari, whose arrogant no in 1963, when Henry Ford II tried to buy his empire, turned a business deal into a personal war. Rumor had it that Ferrari, with his Italian passion and pride, did not shy away from insulting Ford too, calling him a fat, ignorant American. This deeply ingrained wound to his pride fueled Ford's unprecedented determination to destroy Ferrari on their own turf, on the Le Mans track. But this vendetta, according to many, had a second, no less cruel, objective. Ken Miles, a legendary figure whose virtuosity transformed the raw GT40, a car that in 1964 suffered from reliability and aerodynamic problems, into the invincible Mark II, armed with that very side oiler. He was the heart of the project, its driving force. And although some Ford engineers initially doubted the expediency of using such a massive 427 engine, Carroll Shelby and Miles insisted that pure power would be decisive. They perfected this engine, despite rumors that testing might have been cut short to meet impossible deadlines, relying on an excessive margin of safety. But his genius was accompanied by an equally legendary, difficult personality. Miles was uncompromising, straightforward, recognized no authority, and always spoke his mind. He was a rebel within the Ford system, and this, it was whispered in the corridors, cost him his personal Le Mans crown. Ford management, having had enough of his independence and refusing to forgive his audacity, allegedly used the dead heat as a tool to deprive him of sole glory. To hand the victory on a silver platter to McLaren and Eamon, who were more team players. Can you imagine this fury? 24 hours of hell, at the limit of human and mechanical capabilities, overcoming all obstacles, perfecting the car, and at the very moment of triumph, it is taken away. Due to a bureaucratic technicality and possibly cold corporate revenge. It is said that when Miles crossed the line, his gestures towards the Ford pits left no doubt about his contempt. It was not a gesture of defeat, but a furious challenge. Silent, but deafening. In the end, McLaren and Eamon were declared winners. Ford swept the entire podium, first, second, and third places. Ferrari's 6-year dominance, which lasted from 1960 to 1965, was shattered into dust by the unprecedented power of the 8 GT40 Mark IIs fielded by Henry Ford II. The triumph was complete, but its taste remained bitter for many. It was a victory that would go down in the annals of motorsport history not only as a milestone of engineering prowess and team spirit, but also as a vivid example of how ambition, politics, and personal conflicts can distort the purest sporting triumph. Behind the roar of the engines and the cheers of the crowd lay a story of a divided victory, where the true loser might have been the one who deserved it most. The haze over Mulsanne dissipated, carrying with it disputes and doubts. Only the undeniable fact remained. The American flag proudly flew over the Le Mans podium. 1966. The names of McLaren and Eamon went down in history as winners, and with them, the names of those who took second and third place. Ford had achieved the impossible. It came, it saw, and it conquered, crushing the absolute ruler of the racetracks, Ferrari. 6 years of Scuderia's invincibility seemed carved in granite, but that granite crumbled to dust under the wheels of the blue oval, giving way to American power. But behind this triumph, behind the drama of the finish and all the vicissitudes of personal ambitions, lay something far more fundamental. The heart of this victory, an engineering marvel born in the American style, huge, powerful, unpretentious. The Ford 427 side-oiler engine. This was not just an engine, it was a philosophy. And its name, side-oiler, spoke for itself. Unlike traditional systems where oil first went to the main crankshaft bearings and then to the connecting rod bearings, in this unit, pressurized oil was delivered directly to the connecting rod bearings, the most heavily loaded components in a racing engine. Imagine a continuous flow of vital lubrication, drenching parts operating at their absolute limit, at RPMs that until recently were considered unattainable. This was a system designed not just for power, but for reliability. Reliability under the 24-hour hell of Le Mans, where every component screamed under stress. It was this unique lubrication scheme that allowed this 7-liter monster to withstand loads that other engines wouldn't survive for an hour. Recall, in the beginning, many Ford engineers were skeptical of the idea of installing such a massive, heavy engine in the GT40, concerns about handling, about fuel consumption. But Carroll Shelby, the genius who turned American muscle cars upside down, was unyielding. Pure power. It had to be decisive. And he was right. Under his leadership, this engine was perfected to such an extent that even rumors of cutting corners in the testing program for the sake of meeting unthinkable deadlines do not diminish its greatness. The calculation was on an excessive margin of safety, and that calculation paid off. The Ford 427 side-oiler became the steel fist that knocked out all competitors. It was this engineering masterpiece that allowed the 8 GT40 Mark IIs, entered by Ford, to dominate the track from start to finish. This was more than just a victory in one race. It was a triumph of American engineering over European refinement, a symbol of an unyielding will to win that transformed Henry Ford II's personal vendetta into a national treasure. In 1963, when Enzo Ferrari refused to sell control of his racing division, he probably had no idea what an avalanche he had started. An avalanche that, 3 years later, would bury his empire on the main racing podium. Ford didn't just win Le Mans, it broke Ferrari. It showed the world that American industry was capable not only of mass production, but also of creating racing machines that could compete equally with the best in the world and even surpass them. Le Mans 1966 became a turning point in motorsport history. It forever changed the balance of power, solidifying Ford's status as a formidable racing giant. After this victory, which was only the first in a series of 4 consecutive wins from 1966 to 1969, the world could no longer look at American racing cars the same way. The GT40 and its 427 side oiler became a legend, the embodiment of the American dream on the racetrack. They proved that even in the face of an invincible opponent, with enough determination, resources, and genius, any heights can be reached. And today, when we remember Le Mans 1966, we hear not only the roar of the engines, but also the echo of that victory. An echo that reminds us that sometimes, to change the world, all it takes is one perfectly engineered, indomitable heart, a heart that once silenced Ferrari itself. At the sunset of this epic saga, beyond the roar of engines and the triumphant cheers of the crowd, lies not just a story of a race, but a profound drama of human will, the price of pride, and the indomitable power of innovation. The Ford GT40 and its legendary heart, the 427 side oiler, became not just symbols of American might, but a living embodiment of how fury, multiplied by genius, can turn the world upside down, proving that even a personal vendetta can birth greatness. But what truly defines victory? Absolute superiority on the track, or the inevitable compromises and sacrifices that remain in the shadow of resounding success? And can true triumph ever be complete when its taste remains bitter for some? Share your thoughts on this grand battle in the comments below. Which side, in your opinion, paid the highest price? Your opinion is important to us. Don't forget to support our channel with a like and subscribe to not miss new chapters in the endless chronicle of great confrontations.